All right, folks, we got the nod from the camera.
Good call.
All right, it is February 13th, 11 a.m. I'd like to call the meeting of the East Hampton Village Planning Board to order. Welcome, everyone. First on the agenda is the minutes. Okay, so does anybody, have you all read the minutes? Any corrections, changes?
Yes.
No? Motion to accept?
So moved.
All right, all in favor? Aye. Minutes are accepted. All right, next is the subdivision at 44 Hunting Lane. Okay. They have met all the requirements, so I need a motion and a second to sign the final subdivision map for 44 Hunting Lane LLC. Sure. No, it's just us.
Oh, it's just us? Okay. Then I would just like to say for the record, and hope that Mr. King reads it, that that I feel that this property that he was responsible for has not been cared for with the respect it should have been in light of the historic district in our village. We brought it to his attention on several occasions, and I hope that he can, as he continues to develop that property and future properties, that he would take into consideration his neighbors' concerns for the appearance of the property during the process.
Okay,
I would concur.
so noted. Do we have a motion to sign the final subdivision? Motion from Oberon, second?
Second.
Second from Walker. All right, so. With reference to the resolution for 44 Hunting Lane, upon a motion of Oberon Farber and duly seconded by Walker Wainwright, the board unanimously authorizes the chairman to sign the final map dated October 25th, 2019. We'll just sign it afterwards? Yes. Great. Okay. Next, moving on to the continued hearing for EH 226 LLC, 226 Further Lane, and Further Farm LLC, 218 Further Lane.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Matt Packman, Ackerman Partners for the applicant. It's nice to see everyone again. I feel that the second Thursday of the month at 11 a.m., this is where I am. We know from the last meeting, since the last meeting, the board has received comments from the town pursuant to 339 of the General Municipal Law, since the property in question is within 500 feet of the border of the village and the town. And we've had an opportunity to respond to those comments, and I know that Pam, in her efficient way, has distributed our response to the board, and I hope and trust that you have had an opportunity to read and review our response. The town's response, although certainly well-intentioned, I believe shows that they were not, because they could not have been, aware the extent to which the applicant has cooperated on the current design with this board and its consultants at the many meetings that we've had and at the several site visits that we've had with members of this board. And with respect to those site visits, as the board knows, we had an opportunity to have the proposed driveway apron actually mocked up in full scale, so the board members who participated in that site, or those site visits, could actually stand in the apron and experience what cars going east and west on Further Lane and exiting and entering the property would experience. Members of the board, each of the concerns in the town's memo has been thoroughly vetted by the board and its consultants over the past 8 months. And I want to take a moment to express my appreciation for the comments made at the last meeting where the board graciously thanked not me, but the applicant's design team for hearing and responding to your concerns, including concerns about safety. The town's few comments were directed to the creation of an additional curb cut and potential impact upon traffic and the character of further lane. As to the additional curb cut, as the board will recall, the applicant did not originally propose to retain the easterly curb cut. You will recall that. When the board had the opportunity to consider the impact of the FAAR, the fire apparatus access rules, and realized that if we didn't retain the easterly curb cut for 218 further lane, when the board realized, based upon Ken Cullum's advice to them, that the driveway would have to be 26 feet wide. Now remember, members of the board, further lane as actually paved is only 21 to 23 feet wide. When the board realized and heard that the proposed driveway without the second curb cut would have to be 26 feet wide, you felt, it was more in keeping with the character of further lane to go with the plan with 2 curb cuts, so that each driveway would be of a width which was in keeping with the other driveways in the neighborhood. Again, we can only surmise that the town, when it made its comments in the memo, was not aware of this interplay, because how could it have been? Now, the town's comment regarding the width of the new driveway, which it said it believed to be excessive, was under a misimpression that the driveway as proposed was going to be 33 feet in width all the way through. Now, the board is aware that's not the plan. The board is aware that the driveway is only 14 feet wide. It complies with FAAR, but it's only 14 feet in wide. And the board is aware that the apron, and only the apron, as it flares out to further lane, is widened to 38 feet. And the reason it was widened to 38 feet was because of the board's request that there be those traffic calming measures in the middle of the apron to better require the flow of traffic leaving the site to be at its most easterly point. Again, the width of the apron was arrived at after close consultation with its board to address the board's concern about site distances for exiting vehicles. And again, we must remember that the neighbor who is most affected by this proposal has submitted a letter in support of the application. The town's memo also suggests that the proposed location of the curb cut may increase the potential for traffic safety issues. Again, members of the board, you've heard from and have reports from Nelson Pope and Voorhees, which have definitively stated that there are going to be no such traffic concerns. And remember, Nelson Pope and Voorhees, they are retained by boards just like this board on the east end of Long Island and in other municipalities to evaluate such applications. And by the way, members of the board, we're not aware of any disagreement with their conclusions from the board or from any of the board's consultants. In fact, I would note that the village engineer found that the line of sight from the proposed curb cut was adequate. And members of the board, those who participated in the site visits were able to actually stand there, right where the cars were going to be, and experience the sight lines for themselves, for yourselves. Finally, the town's memo appears to warn that the elimination of the requirement of the prior subdivision approval for a shared driveway could set a precedent for other parcels in the town and the village. Well, again, I think that their statement with respect to this application setting a precedent for the town was inadvertently misstated, because of course, a determination from the village can't have any precedential value to the town. And as to the village, this board is aware and very cognizant of the fact that the willingness of the board to consider relieving the properties of this original 1976 condition was based on our very specific set of facts, including the fact that not eliminating that requirement would result in a road, in a driveway that is 26 feet wide. And thus, such an approval would not have any precedential value, but only would be a statement of the specific facts in this application and not a question of general policy. Members of the board, you've had an opportunity to carefully consider this application, to visit the site. We've addressed all the concerns. We respectfully request that you adopt a negative declaration under SEQA and conditionally approve the application, subject to approval of the Suffolk County Department of Health. And if the board has no question of me, I believe that David Dubin would like to say a few words on behalf of one of the two applicants. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention.
Can I give this to you to look at?
We all have it.
This,
We
you
all
see,
have
have that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's okay, I understand, it's okay. Yeah, no, that's good, that's good. Good morning. Yeah, well, that's part of Pam's efficiency. Good morning, David Dubin, Toomey Latham, Shea, Kelly, Dubin, and Corderaro, 20 Main Street, East Hampton, on behalf of EH226 LLC. This board has sat patiently for the past 8 months, thoroughly vetting this lot line modification application. So I promise to be painfully brief. As Mr. Packman noted, very early stages of this lot line modification application, and I emphasize lot line modification application because I certainly personally have never been involved in a lot line modification application that has been this thoroughly vetted before, and I admire you for that, and you've done some great work here. So this board, on the very early stages of the application, they perceptively suggested that 2 narrower driveways servicing these properties would be more flattering to the character of the neighborhood than a shared 26-wide driveway due to the FAR requirements. We agreed, and we put our engineers, our surveyors, our landscape professionals, our traffic experts to work. And they worked very hard. Now, to illustrate this point, as Mr. Packman had, just picture a 26-wide driveway when you're leading into it from Further Lane, which is 21 feet to 23 feet. That's, in some places, 5 feet wider than Further Lane. One of the board members, I thought, accurately described it at the early stage board meetings. It would be a bowling alley. So our engineers, Nelson, Pope, and Voorhees, and we have Mr. Scott here from that firm if you have any questions, they submitted reports, studies, analyses, testimony, reconfirming that the proposed driveway that we've proposed now exceeds all safety standards, just doesn't meet them, but exceeds them. Well, as the board knows, they looked at those studies and they wanted more. So we had these site visits for the board to come out to kick the tires, so to speak. And they kicked the tires. And again, I admire you for taking the time to do that. So after all that, after all the submissions we submitted, the only thing we got back from the village's consultants was the fire chief and the village engineer who concurred that that new driveway will meet the safety standards. Nothing else from the village. I'm not going to repeat what Mr. Packman did with the town's comments, but I think it suffice it to say they didn't come close to vetting this application like you did. Our landscape professionals, LaGuardia Design, presented a design that not only complements the surrounding neighborhood, but in our opinion, enhances it. I wish every driveway on Further Lane and elsewhere in the village looked like this. Now, the chair has explained that there should be changed circumstances for this board to move beyond the 1979 subdivision condition of a shared driveway. As Mr. Packman noted, that's over 40 years ago. Things were different then. The simple reason is that when that state code was amended in 2015, which reflected the increase in size in fire engines and fire equipment, you needed now 26 feet for all the access to do it, which means that the easterly drive now violates that condition, those conditions. And the flagpole that exists there does not satisfy those conditions. That's a textbook example of a change of circumstances. So what's the result? What's the simple and logical conclusion? With the addition of the proposed driveway, the net result is an access driveway for 226 Further Lane that meets the FAR standards and is of a width and character that complements the neighbor's properties. Thank you.
Any other comments from the applicant or the public?
Yes, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I simply wanted to share with you some thoughts about how that the original driveway placement came to be, because I know that is also appears to be a subject of some concern, the fact that the driveway is being relocated from the easterly side of the lot to the westerly side. And we've reviewed what we can of the old files, and as far as we're able to tell, the fact that the driveway was located along the easterly side instead of the westerly side was simply a function of where the surveyor happened to place the 20-foot wide easement that existed. As Mr. Dubin has noted, the condition for a shared driveway was imposed at the time of the original subdivision. That was 1976 in a deed from Zachary, when Zachary Fisher first subdivided this property. At that time, it was still possible under the village's zoning code to have further subdivided the property so that instead of the 2 lots that now exist, there could possibly be 3, because the zoning at that time was only 80,000 square feet, and now it's 120. So that the lot belonging to Further Farm was, at the time the covenant was imposed, capable of further subdivision. So that the covenant on a shared driveway also helped assure that you wouldn't have 3 curb cuts instead of just 1. The other thing I think that has been the result of working with the board here is that, as Mr. Dubin alluded to, instead of having a grandfathered 20-foot wide easement, which does not meet the current requirements for fire apparatus access, you will have a driveway serving the 226 lot, which has the widened portion in the middle to enable fire apparatus to better access the property, complies with what's required, and better serves the interests of fire safety. As far as the precedential value of this board's decision, we often talk about precedents in terms of what a zoning board does, because the zoning board creates a body of law when it grants variances and gives code interpretations. The approval of a subdivision or the modification of a subdivision is a far more discretionary action by a planning board. We can't come in here and tell you we insist that you give us this approval. It's not like a variance where if we prove all the factors, you must give it to us under the law. And so I would just say that a concern about setting a precedent here, although I'm sure the town's planner was sincere when she voiced the concern, is not really an accurate reflection of what the law is. I think that you can, without fear of setting a precedent, grant the approval here because of the changed circumstances, because it overall serves the planning purposes, which I'm sure include enhancing fire safety, and be sure that no one can compel you to do this unless you find the circumstances equally compelling in another different application. Thank you very much.
Anybody else? Anybody else want to speak? All right. I was going to go,
Okay, go ahead.
but you go ahead. You go first.
Okay. I just was going to say that whoever is here, I hope you can appreciate that I am not an attorney, so I speak to all of you with the respect of your professionalism. But I do feel, as a member of the planning board, that I represent the community where I grew up. And I don't find any decisions by the planning board that were made decades ago minor, because I know what Further Lane looked like at the time that the Fisher subdivision was considered. So I'm considering, as a member of the planning board, my responsibility to look into the future of East Hampton and anticipate that there will not be another alternative to Montauk Highway. It will be Further Lane. So the antiquity of that decision doesn't make it irrelevant to me. It makes it all the more relevant because we need to look forward into the future, what will be happening with Further Lane. And I just want to comment on a few things. One is this image that you have on that poster board there, it's lovely, it's serene, it's not our concern. My concern is safety now and anticipating what could potentially be going on Further Lane in the future. So, Mr. Dubin, I do wish that all driveways looked as lovely as that. But the reality is, if you spend time on Further Lane, or in this community generally, which is what the planning board needs to take into consideration, is that the driveways aren't likely to have a lovely little singular sedan entering or exiting the property. They're more likely to have huge landscaping vehicles, which the planning board a couple of decades ago could not have anticipated. The landscaping vehicles, and there's a lot of construction, and those construction vehicles are also big. So I also do wish that driveways all look like that, but that's not what they look like. They look like garbage trucks and construction trucks and major vehicles coming in and out. And I also feel that the neighbor who's there, I've lived in the community long enough to know that while it's very nice that there's a neighbor who's willing to acknowledge that they do not have a concern with the current desires of the applicant for this property, I'm looking at it in terms of who the neighbor might be in 10 years or 20 years. And so, you know, that's just how I feel. I'm not an attorney, but I just wanted to comment on Mr. Dubin's saying that he wished that all driveways looked like that. I do too, but the reality is they don't.
All right, I'd like to, thank you. So we received, as everybody's noted, a letter from the town supervisor and from the assistant planning director. Has everybody read through that?
Yes.
Read through that? Okay. I'd like to respond to Ackerman, Packman, Brown, and Goldstein LLP's letter dated February 5th, 2020. I just have a couple of concerns. Page 1, paragraph 2, there seems to be some inaccuracy in the last sentence. I don't recall the offer by the applicant to abandon the easterly curb cut. That was never something that I recall from the initial application. There was a representation that it would not be used in the immediate future, but never to eliminate the applicant's right to that easterly curb cut. The footnote at the bottom of the page, I believe, is my comment. Since September 12th, 2019, there's been more information, site visits to the property, input, and gatherings at the property. The concern of how permitting a second driveway could impact the character of the neighborhood and safety issues has led me to believe that the prior planning board may have had it correct when they created the subdivision. I took a quick look on Suffolk County GIS, going from Old Beach Lane to Skim Hampton, just at the curb cuts and the tax map and the overlay, and it looks like approximately 12 additional parcels. I may have missed a couple. I may have added a couple in, not 100% sure, because I don't have the CNRs or the deeds. Could request direct access onto further lane, thus possibly affecting the character in the neighborhood. Page 2, paragraph 4 speaks about the Far Road and the current 20-foot wide flag strip and safety concerns. Page 2, paragraph 5 speaks to a 14-foot wide clearing once you get past the initial flare-out, which seems to go against somewhat the reasoning of the desire to have the Far Road. It's just my perception of it. The existing 20-foot flag strip could be cleared to the full 20-foot. Also in paragraph 5, it speaks about the board's consultation to address the site distance issues. Yes, we consulted, but it seems that you came back with something very different from when we first met, when we talked about swinging the driveway to give better site distance. You know, we talked about swinging it to the east so you could get out of the dip in the elevation and away from the the foliage that exists just to the west of the property. Instead, it seems that the applicant flared out 38 feet to push up right against that foliage to the west. The raised center, although well-intentioned, you know, it's going to push drivers exiting the property to the western portion of that. When it was intended only to be egress, it's going to wind up, when it was intended only to be used as ingress, it's going to be used for egress. I see that happen over at Jeffrey's Lane all the time. Somebody's pulling out, they're going left, they pull out of the left, they come out, they're going right towards town, they pull out. In addition, there was concern about what happens into the future about the sight lines looking east. You remember we had these conversations? The northern lot is allowed to plant all the way to the street. There were conversations about providing some sort of an easement so that that view wouldn't be blocked, so you would maintain that view to the east, that sight line distance. The board never received anything that was reviewed as part of this application. Page 2, paragraph 6 talks about the village engineer found that the sight lines were adequate. What was left out is that they were found adequate in its current condition. What happens when it's planted to the east? That changes the situation. The observation of several board members on several occasions to the property found that, you know, it was, even though the AASHTO standards were met and the village engineer made that statement, we found that it was hard to view, particularly bicyclists coming from the west moving east. That's why we had talked about swinging the driveway. And you know, as you said, Nelson, Pope, and Voorhees, well-respected consultants, but we as board members are allowed to rely on our common sense and actual observations when going through the process. The letter from Nelson, Pope, and Voorhees dated January 31st, 2020, paragraph 3 discusses low utilization. I'm not sure how accurate that is when you start talking about July and August and you have a large home and it's full and people are coming and going a couple of times a day. Also, they talk about the new driveway being safer. I'm not sure if that is accurate either, because you have the northern lot that can plant right up to the road. You have the foliage just to the west of the driveway. I can't comment on the conflict points because, it's not an expertise and it's not something that I really observed. But the sightline distance coming from west, when you're looking west, was a problem. So, and then page 2, paragraph 6, again, the board is allowed to use their common sense when evaluating the application and considering the AASHTO standards. So that's what, those are my comments on that letter. What we now need to do is go through SECRA and, kind of come to a conclusion about this. So some of the items to be considered is, did the applicant demonstrate a significant change in circumstances to warrant modifying a previous planning board's decision? The applicants, basically, they want an uninterrupted front lawn, a second curb cut. The reason is to comply with FAR requirements, make it safer. However, the current access is 20 feet wide and could be clear to that width.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I am interrupting, so I guess I do need to.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Respectfully, these are the first time that we have heard these comments from the board, and so I think it would be appropriate, and I would suggest fair, if we could adjourn the meeting at this point so we can respond to some of your comments, some of those statements, so that you could have a fuller consideration before you reach some of the conclusions that you appear to be starting to reach. So we would ask that this matter has been adjourned on multiple occasions over a number of months. I don't see how there would be any detriment to this board or the village if the matter was adjourned, and so I'm respectfully requesting that before the board starts voting on secret determinations and what may otherwise be other determinations with respect to this application, that we be given an opportunity to digest what has been said by the board today and have an opportunity to respond. I don't think there's anything. I think that would only be fair, and certainly there would be no prejudice to the village or the village board if that was granted.
So we would hold the hearing open
That's correct.
and not do SECRA?
That's what we're requesting.
Do we have some timing issues or anything that?
Not if the hearing is still open, no.
Not if the hearing is still open. All right, so I'm taking it you do not want to hear the rest of what's going on?
We've heard your comments and the comments of the other board members, so I would suggest, I'd request at this point, yes, that the matter be adjourned. So
The
that
other
we-
board members, some of the other board members may have a differing opinion, so.
It seemed to me that you were about to be laying some findings of facts before a vote be taken. Certainly, if there's a colloquy, we would appreciate a colloquy. If there was a colloquy, we would appreciate the colloquy, of course.
Okay.
But that's what it seemed to me, and maybe I apologize if I misunderstood what was happening.
And I don't know. This is what I'm, I felt it was imperative to respond to this letter as I
And you
saw
did,
it written.
understood, and
Because
that's right.
It seems like we were at the same meetings, but we weren't.
Well, I don't think that's fair. With all due respect, I think we've been with this is now our 8th meeting. We were at the same meetings, and we got the minutes to those meetings. And we tried to carefully digest what was said at those meetings and tried to respond intelligently without having these comments we haven't heard all of these comments that are coming out now, that's for sure. And so I think what Mr. Packman is saying, yes, it's, if it'd be nice to have the opportunity
To hear, after, again, this period of time, it'd be nice to have an opportunity to hear from some of the other board members who have been patiently sitting here, and then, we can see, well, do we really need to respond to all of this? And if we do, we'd like the opportunity to do that.
Do you have any comments you would like to add?
Not at this moment.
Walker?
I wonder why there is a negative feeling about a swinging driveway.
Can I just address, because
Go ahead, come on.
I'm Oliver Cope. I'm the architect, but I also attended the site meetings. And I have a slightly different recollection. I recall the discussion of swinging the driveway as an option, but I was at pains to distinguish the circumstances you see at the moment where there is a hedge planted on the easterly side of the driveway, the proposed driveway strip, but it's not in the correct location. It was done in anticipation of a different design, and it's 8 feet further west than it needs to be. And I was at pains at that time when we were discussing options and the widening of the driveway mouth, the addition of the traffic calming of the rise in the center, that it was important to understand that the reality of what people saw was not what really is going to be constructed, and that we're proposing as an alternative the width, the raised area in the center, but that we would, with a wider driveway, in fact, not need to swing it further. And that we may have missed each other in that whole conversation, but I remember emphasizing the point that that was not something that we were suggesting ultimately that we do. So it's, I don't want it to appear that we ignored you because we had a different understanding of the outcome of that site visit. Okay.
I just had one more question, if I could. I'm sorry. I started by telling you I was going to be brief, and I wasn't realizing this is
No,
where we were heading.
Look, we're all trying to get to a good
No,
solution.
that's the way we started, you know, and I appreciated that, because I do a lot of work in some of the neighboring jurisdictions, and that's not the approach that some of the planning board takes, and I wish they did, and I wish they were as thorough as you are in respect. So, and I don't have any authority to tell you that we can go ahead and do this, but it seemed like you made a big point of saying that the easterly driveway is actually not being abandoned. Well, it can't be completely abandoned, as you know, because the Nature Conservancy has a pedestrian easement over that driveway. But my question, and it should also be noted that the parties, the two parties who were before here, have reached a settlement in which the agreement is that won't be used for the lifetime of Mr. Barron and his family and the like. And I realize that might not be enough for you, but what if, how would you feel if it went one step further and they said, okay, and again, no authority to say this, but I want to have a discussion because I want to feel like how we can get to a reasonable solution. What if they said that they continue that? It wouldn't just be past the lifetime of their family, but it would be continued. Is that something that would make a dramatic impact to what the board is looking at? And he would take access from another, and he could take access from another place. And again, just want to get a sense of what we're up against here.
So there would be no net gain driveway? There wouldn't be an additional driveway? It would still just be one driveway?
Yeah, not for ingress and egress of vehicles. It would be limited to use by the Nature Conservancy, which candidly, I don't think anybody's ever seen.
The Nature Conservancy easement is pedestrian only.
Right.
Right.
That's what I said, yeah.
Technically speaking, we don't need to maintain a vehicular curb cut in order to continue to honor that access.
I mean, it just seemed to me that that was a big part of what this discussion was, a big part of what Ms. Farber said, it was a big part of what the chair said, and we want to get to a happy place, okay? And to me, if that's one of the biggest issues, is this 40-year-old issue, which was appropriate at the time, and it may continue to be appropriate, well, this is a direct way of addressing that. Because then this driveway didn't have to be, with that, what happened with the planning board back 40 years ago, the driveway didn't have to be in the easterly location. You heard that why it was placed there. It was just happened to be where the easement is. So why wouldn't you give this applicant the flexibility of moving it if they said they wouldn't continue to use for vehicular use the easterly driveway? That's a question.
Yeah, so couple of things, right? So if we kind of swung it, right, to the east a little bit so that we get that view, sight distance, I would feel good about that. I don't know if
Swung what?
swung the driveway a little bit to the east.
That
The
side,
proposed,
the proposed.
well, they would,
Yeah.
if they swing it to the east, they can narrow the 38-foot curb cut. Right? So let's just run through this, okay,
Mr.
together?
Chairman, may I just ask a question, and I apologize. Maybe part of the dialogue we're having now is, when you say swing it to the east, can you just maybe say what you mean by that?
Yeah, we looked at one right down the street. You remember we all went to the other driveway right down the street that had kind of a swing to it that moved it off?
When we visited the property, we did.
The Brown estate?
62.
Is it?
Yeah, we were there.
And then
We
it just kind of moves it off like maybe, I think it moved it like maybe 15, 20 feet. I can't be, my memory's not that good.
Yeah, it moved it but it kept it way
It was
wider.
very wide.
It kept it way wider
Yeah, yeah.
than I think
So
anybody would want
we were
it.
not talking about keeping that width. We're talking about
Just the start.
just to move it off of that, to solve that sight distance issue.
Right.
And we also need to talk about something that preserves the sight lines when looking to the east. So you're pulling out of the driveway, you're looking towards Amagansett, something that preserves that sight line. Billy had suggested a road widening easement. I'm not suggesting that.
We had offered, however, a covenant that we would keep it clear of
Yep.
anything except low vegetation within a certain number of feet.
But we never saw anything.
Well,
Okay, so now this is the opportunity to address it. So a covenant, so the planning board could issue its conditional approval, subject to a covenant that says that has to be kept open.
So the other thing then is if we're going to eliminate that access to the east, right? That will then, once you have more than four buildings, which would be if they develop that front lot and the back lot's developed, it changes the character of that driveway that we're going to put into the west. So the other question is, again, I know we're just kind of trying to figure this out. Would Mr. Barron give access? Because now you're coming through the town, because his other property is in the town, correct? The one just to the east?
Village.
No, not the northerly lot. The next one over?
I think because of the distance that we had to notice, it was 500 feet. It was I think Mr. Cullen's right that it had to be, because it was a lot in between those lots.
It's in Ms. Paulwell's letter of January
The
10th.
lot on which he has his house is in the village.
Oh, it is in the
Two
village.
lots beyond that to the east of the town.
It doesn't solve that problem then.
Which problem is it that you're thinking of?
The problem is that I'm thinking about that if we eliminate that one, if we eliminate that curb cut to the east, you now have to have a full-size FAR.
We did have a discussion with Mr. Cullen.
We're not going to end it here. It's just going to be a discussion. It's not going to end it.
Mr. Barron's, whether the further farm lot, if it took its access off the shared driveway close to the street, whether the shared driveway only had to be 26 feet wide until the first lot peeled off. And Mr. Cullen was of the view that that would not comply with the state code. And I don't know if that's still his view. There is the alternative of asking for code interpretation from the regional board.
Well, Mr. Cullen's here. He can-
I think that you need to speak into the microphone.
Oh, sorry.
The TV people can't hear you.
Just so the board is clear on the alternatives that we've looked at, because we have looked at a number of alternatives as we became aware of the town's expressed concerns, even though we thought that the town's concerns were basically a function of the fact that they hadn't been informed of all of this board's deliberations and contributions to the design we currently have. We spoke to Mr. Cullum about whether if we abandoned the easterly curb cut, as we had originally, my recollection is that's what we had originally proposed during our pre-application meeting. That was the plan. And when in discussions that included Mr. Cullum, it became clear that the resulting driveway would have to be 26 feet wide. It seemed that there was a preference for retaining the easterly curb cut and having a narrower driveway when we essentially swapped the access point on the easement. But as we looked at the town's comments, we went back to Mr. Cullum and asked him whether if we abandoned the easterly curb cut so that both parcels took their access off the now westerly driveway, and if we took the access off the further farm lot quite close to the street, whether the 26-foot width would only have to be for that portion, because that would be the only portion that would serve more than 4 buildings. And then as the driveway continued on its basically 1,400-foot run back to Mr. Fixel's lot, whether that portion of the driveway could go back to revert to the 14-foot width. I will tell you that having read the FAR rules, it's not clear what the answer is. Mr. Cullum has given us his interpretation, and I'm not aware, although we haven't had the discussion with him about whether that's also a regional board's or state board interpretation that's been offered so far. If they don't have such an interpretation, then one of the other things we could do is go to the regional board. That's the board that grants variances from state code requirements, and ask them to give us an interpretation about whether we could do that so that we wouldn't have this very wide driveway serving the entire length. But it is equally clear, no matter what the interpretation is, that if this board is concerned about the appearance of the driveway from further lane, if we have a single driveway serving both lots, from the standpoint of what passersby will see, they will see a 26-foot wide driveway because we have to get access off that front lot from someplace. So I just want to explain what we've been thinking about so that the board will understand that we have looked at some of the other alternatives.
Thank you. Ken?
Good morning, board members. So I will give you the interpretation that New York State and the regional board, as well as Albany, has handed down, which is when you went to 62 Further Lane to view those properties, is why that road is 26 feet in width. It does have to be terminated within 150 feet of the front door of the last residence, and the reason for that is our pre-connects on most fire apparatus are 150 to 200 feet long. The reason it has to go all the way back is because if there is an emergency at the front house with fire apparatus access in that road and something occurs at the back residence, we need to be able to get emergency vehicles back there. As you well are aware of the West End Road fire where we trapped an ambulance in and could not get that out. Mr. Packman is very well aware of the back and forth with Richard Smith from the Department of State and Albany as far as they have not granted variances for reducing the width of the apparatus access road because of, as you well know, our ladder truck, the width of when the outriggers are out, how much that blocks the road. You know, and the workaround that the fire chief looked at was the 2 driveway accesses. So currently the plan that you were looking at does meet that. However, I'm not here to debate 1 or 2 or 3 driveway accesses. I'm just telling you what we have to look at as far as state code. And you're correct in the fact if you abandon the easterly driveway or whatever you decide to do, is I think you're going to be sterilizing that 218 unless there's some way to then go back and redevelop that driveway to 26 feet in width all the way back to 226's within 150 feet of their front door. So that's basically what I know about New York State code. The rest of it, I'll leave to you folks to deliberate.
Ken has to keep explaining this to me because he understands it. And so we've had conversations about it, and for a moment I understand it, and then
You know, we've all had these
I
conversations
agree.
about this.
So, and I agree. So, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, I just want to say two things at this point. The first is that I know you can see that the applicants are trying to reach a solution which accommodates all of the reasonable concerns. And we appreciate this colloquy, because this is the way that we can best understand how we could try to move and adapt the application to meet the board's concerns. So this is great, and we appreciate it. The second thing is, you can hear from what Ken said that if this application as presently before you, I understand you have some concerns about it, but if it was adopted, one thing that would clearly result is that from a fire safety and public health point of view, this is better than what currently exists. Because the same things, the same concerns that Ken was talking to you about exist today with the existing Easterly Road. I just ask that when you balance the various factors that you are considering, that you just keep that in mind. This is not something that the applicant is saying. It's something that the person charged with interpreting the FAAR rules in the village has said it is his clear understanding. Members of the board, I'd ask that we continue this colloquy because I think it's very helpful, and I know that the applicant very much appreciates it. But you can see that this is not an application, and there have been applications that have come before you and other boards, I know, I've been doing this for a long time, where the applicant says, this is the only way, and this is why it's the only way. But we really have tried to look at other possibilities, other permutations, both with this board and among ourselves. And I think you can see that by the statements that Mr. Dubin and Ms. Margolin are saying here today. So this is what we're trying to wrestle with. And we'd appreciate an additional conversation with the board ongoing now. I think this is fantastic.
And this is all to get an uninterrupted front lawn. It's a lot of work. Mischaracterization? Please.
It is a mischaracterization.
Just,
Both of these property owners believe that they're going to benefit from this application because in each case, it solves some development problems or some potential use problems that are inherent in the original subdivision, the way it was done. I think they would never have agreed to make a joint application to this board if they didn't both see a benefit from what they were able to create by essentially relocating the access point from one side to the other. It creates a benefit for the rear lot, it creates a benefit for the front lot. Both of them feel they're better served by this. I mean, who could have foreseen all this many years ago that the utility of both parcels would be better served by, in the case of the rear lot, a wider access than you could get down a narrow 20-foot easement. And that, I mean, I will say, even though the fire safety rules here are an impediment to exactly what we want to do, I think we all have to recognize that the fire safety rules and the apparatus access rules exist for a reason, and that this village has many locations where, historic easement access and narrow roads pose constant problems for access for fire apparatus, and that it is a real change. It represents a real change from conditions as they were perceived over 40 years ago. The equipment is bigger. We are institutionally a lot smarter about what we need for access. The drive for what I will call privacy and a bucolic setting has to be weighed against safety concerns in ways that I think we didn't necessarily do as a government and a society 40-odd years ago. And I think that as onerous it is sometimes to comply with it, I think on some basis this board and applicants before it have to recognize the fact that the safety rules exist for a reason, and that we should embrace, if we have to, the changes that come with recognizing them. Thank you.
I'll expand just briefly on what Linda said and also Ken, because I don't want to give the impression that we are bypassing the FAAR rules. It's that they're different depending on whether they're serving 4 buildings or more. And so the road widens at intervals that are required by code. And I think we have 3, is that right, Dan? 2? Anyway, we widen at intervals so that vehicles can pass one another from the 14 feet, but we still maintain the spirit of the 14-foot road, which I think is important from everybody's point of view for the character of the community. We have the required hammerhead turns as we get close to the house. And just as an aside, because it is a concern of ours and our clients, he's invested in a water main and a hydrant, and the house is sprinklered. So life safety is a concern, and not just for the occupants, it's a concern for the men and women who are volunteers and put their lives on the line to come and help people out. And the idea that we would potentially frustrate that effort by having the activity in one emergency means it possible to exit or arrive for another is a pretty scary proposition. So I think here we've tried, and I think the board has tried, and Ken has tried, to balance the scale of the community and what appears more as modest as we can make it with safety, and we're making all of those efforts. And at 62, the sweep was much less sort of apparent to me than just the wide expanse of pavement, which is the thing we're trying to avoid.
Okay. You have comments?
I do. We made clear in the beginning, it's not just, the design team has been beautiful. I mean, we have collaborated along the way as we voiced our concerns. I think everybody has tried to collaborate well, but we said from the very beginning, the planning board made a decision a long time ago with regard to number of curb cuts, and it would take something significant, important for us to overrule that decision a long time ago. And I just want to say at this time, since we're in this colloquy, that Mr. Ackerman, assembled a very impressive team. Mr. Packman, your work, we appreciate that. We appreciate it, and I believe, we're impressed and we respect it. But East Hampton has a really good team too. And we may be in the village, but we're in a village that is in the town of East Hampton. And I truly appreciate Joanne Powell's letter of January 10th. I have a lot of respect for her, and I agree with her conclusion that there are a number of other common driveway easements on Further Lane located both within the village and the town, and that the subject proposal to eliminate this requirement from these parcels could set a precedent for other parcels. That refers back to what our chairman said. And there's been, so far, 3 representatives from your team that have, in my opinion, been a little dismissive of this January 10th letter from the town. And I have enough respect for them and what they stated that I don't agree that they haven't done their due diligence. I suspect they fully read the meeting minutes and discussed with various members what was under consideration. So I thank them for their letter of January 10th, and I appreciate it.
Billy, you have any comments?
No, I have nothing to add at this time.
Any comments?
Nothing to add.
What are our options right now?
Well, they've asked to adjourn, and we'll keep the hearing open so we don't get caught up in any sort of timeframe where we have to take action, which they can do. So we don't have a good solution at this point to this issue. Fair?
That's a very fair statement. I guess I'm a little perplexed by 2 things, and I certainly respect Ms. Barber's comments, and I don't know whether those other common driveways that they've cited in the town's letter are code compliant, fire code compliant, because that to me is a pretty big question, and whether, and you're talking about what, you need something very significant. Again, I would respectfully tell you that I don't know what more important it would be than fire and safety, to be able to have access, ingress and egress. But I guess my question is this, really. If you just formulate an opinion that there's nothing we can do at this point to have a second curb cut, which is what I thought you had encouraged us to do from the very beginning, then where are we? Then where are we? Are we back to the original application that we made that said that we're going to use the common driveway and try to satisfy the fire code requirements? Because again, with respect, it's been 8 months, and your time is valuable, and I don't want to have us coming back with comments to try to encourage you to have a second driveway when you just have said to us, if you've said to us, you know what, you're wasting your time with that because of the comments that were made today. So I do think that's an important question to resolve so that we can know what we need to do next to get this application going forward. Thank you.
I have felt that your concerns and your conversations over time have tried to address our concerns mostly with design concepts. But we said at the very beginning, and I have continued to say through this entire process, that before we overturn a prior planning board decision, the issues that they brought to their decision-making process would come into our decision-making process. We said that from the very beginning, and I have felt during this that perhaps that hasn't been given the attention that we suggested from the beginning it should.
But I respect that, and when you say attention, but besides having Nelson Pope and Voorhees submit all kinds of safety analyses and traffic studies, besides all of the overwhelming material that we've submitted, what other attention can we give to that planning board decision from some years ago that would satisfy you?
It's a good decision. I can only tell you that I do not come to the same conclusion with regard to the safety issues that we voiced and that your consultants determined were sufficient. That's
Okay.
my opinion.
Okay, so so then that goes back to the question of where, and one of the board members said, what are our options? I think we'd equally like to know what our options are so that we can progress here.
We have a question, and we'd like, if possible, to get the sense of the board members. That is to say, if we were to present to you a plan in which we abandoned the easterly curb cut and did whatever was required to satisfy state code, whether as it stands right now or whether we get a ruling from the regional board, and make the driveway in its proposed westerly location as wide as is required by the code, is that going to be satisfactory to the board or the board members? In other words, as I recall happened in our pre-application meeting, that was what we originally intended to do. We didn't expect to ask for relief from the covenant. We simply wanted to relocate the driveway from the easterly side of the parcel to the westerly side. And leaving aside the issue of how wide that driveway has to be, will that satisfy this board's concerns? Because if it does, we will turn our design and legal attention to that so that we can come back with a plan that doesn't require you to revisit the wisdom of requiring a covenant for a single curb cut.
That's what I was asking, because to me, the only thing that I heard, was an adamant sense from the board that no matter how many poster boards we came in with and how many times we asked LaGuardia Design to come back with even more beautiful renderings, that we were still facing square up against that covenant that exists. So if we are, and we agree we still want to get to a happy place, why not what we've talked about here by abandoning it and having only one curb cut?
Okay, I have a couple of,
Yeah.
Ken wants to speak, and then I got a question for you first. Sure. So, if we abandon the other curb cut, we're gonna get the same width as what we have down at 62 further at Brown. Is that correct?
Seems like it, yeah.
Okay.
Just a quick comment for the board, so that all of mine.
All of your respected wisdom.
All right. So just so the board is aware that the only reason why this fire apparatus access road is in front of you is because there is a change to a previous planning board subdivision. If you decide to take no action, in other words, not grant that, it was also brought up at 62 further when they were looking at abandoning or keeping or doing whatever for those other lots. So if you take no action, you don't have to put in a FAR. You don't have to do anything. So there is that other fact that if no action is taken, they don't have to upgrade their road. And Mr. Ackerman had went back to the family at those 3 lots and discussed that with them, and they came up with what they came up with at that property. So just so you're aware, it doesn't have to, you don't have to have a 26-foot driveway. It's only if it's new subdivisions or subdivisions that go back and are revisited. That's what trips it.
If we modify an existing.
If you're modifying an existing, then you do trip it. And that has been vetted through New York State as well, through, that office, through Richard Smith's office, is what trips it. And this was a very long, I'm not sure how many board members sat on that, but that was a very long, arduous thing that you had to deal with back then as well. So there's several things that you need to look at, whatever you decide to do, but I just want to make sure you guys have all the information that I have, so you can make a good decision.
And this way, if you did that, and if we didn't have the 26, if we can go, we did no action, I think you'd agree with me, though, that wouldn't improve fire safety.
We don't have the ability to force that on you.
Understood,
Yeah.
but just what results? What results is a 20-foot wide
20-foot wide driveway.
that doesn't comply with FAR.
They don't have to.
No, you still, they don't have to,
Yeah.
but the point is we're trying to do something that enhances safety.
Well, yeah, you're trying to do something for your clients to make your clients happy. I mean, I understand that. I mean, when we looked at the aerial photographs, when they first went in and they started digging up 218, they had already planted the row of trees over there when Matthews, David Curse, and Cooley were working there, they had already had planted those trees for that westerly side. And we had started this conversation probably 2014, 2013, I believe, when Mr. Barron purchased that property. And that conversation started way back then.
Understood.
Yeah, so.
And all I'm suggesting is that if you're trying to improve safety, which you can do, and you can get back to one curb cut, which we discussed, why wouldn't that be a better solution than just a no-action solution? That's the only point that I'm making.
And that's for the board.
Yep, understood.
Yes. So not to lose focus, I think the question still stands. The question, I think, as posed by Ms. Margolin and Mr. Dubin is a very, very important one, and that question still stands. That, you know, if we were able to satisfy that, would that satisfy the board as to the one curb cut if having the one curb cut on the westerly side was able to satisfy the FAAR standards one way or the other?
Ms. Baldwin, would it be appropriate to poll?
Yeah, I was going to suggest, I mean, I think that question is determined by the circumstances of the application that's in front of the board. So I would offer a suggestion that you come back with alternatives, that you could propose alternatives that keeps two curb cuts and maybe incorporate some of the comments that the chairman made early on in the meeting. You can propose an alternative that proposes a single curb cut that complies with the FAR requirements. I mean, why? I don't see why.
I respect, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I was thinking about, and tell me if this is appropriate, legally appropriate, polling the board to see how they feel about modifying the previous planning board's decision. Is that appropriate at this time? Because we haven't gone through SECRA. And then polling the board about how they would feel about, I guess, about having that 26-foot wide road running all the way down, similar to Brown, where you have one access.
Well, I think as Billy said, having the alternative aspects is also a part of SECRA.
Okay.
So having those, seeing for the board to have the opportunity to see those alternatives might be something that would aid in providing the information for the board to make it SECRA.
So it would not be appropriate to poll the board at this time about,
To do that right now.
okay, as opposed to polling the board about overturning a previous planning board's decision? Okay.
I mean, I think if the board has made its determination as far as the application as a whole and is ready to make its decision, I think the board can make that decision. If the board would prefer to have the applicant submit other number of the alternatives that would allow them to review to see what they think would be most appropriate, then you
Yeah.
have that ability as well.
We can't get there until we go through this whole SECRA process and make a final, you know, and make
So
a
if you
final,
don't
and
think
take
they've
an actual.
addressed the other alternatives adequately at this point, then that's something the board needs to consider.
Mr. Chair, could we ask for some informal comments from the board as to our suggestion about eliminating the easterly curb cut, to see if not saying that that is going to do it in and of itself, but if we did that, would that then at least address a number of the comments that we heard today, and then work to get the both, to go ahead and say, okay, this is what we can focus on going forward? Because I appreciate Billy's comments to say you have to have options, and one board member said, what are the options? And I think candidly now we'd like to understand what that is.
Understood. I mean, we'll just go, from my perspective, if you eliminate that other curb cut, it's good because there's no net gain in access, right? We're not gaining another driveway, there's no precedent, and all down that road. But then you have that visually 26-foot wide driveway running all the way down, which is kind of out of character with the neighborhood, and, you know, it's really it's not appealing, and it's out of character with the neighborhood, really.
But if it wasn't going to serve vehicular access any longer, why wouldn't it be able, it's just going to then be for the Nature Conservancy's pedestrian access, why couldn't it be, in effect, where you wouldn't even see what was, you know?
I'm talking about the relocation of the driveway from the east to the west.
Oh.
You'd then have that 26-foot.
If it had to be 26 feet wide.
Which I believe it does have to be 26 feet
Well,
wide. Ken? Yeah.
So you have us betwixt and between.
As are we.
Huh?
As are we.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's, you know, you know, that's why I guess it goes back to what are the options? Because you know, really would like to see us get to a place where we can both be satisfied.
I mean, the current application doesn't address the safety issues. So that's a big problem. And it seems to be, you know, and it seems to be out of character, that 38-foot width with a kind of triangle entrance and exit. Does anybody else have any comments on that? Go ahead.
I just want to reiterate that while your consultant provided an opinion with regard to the safety issues, I don't concur with the conclusions. I mean, no disrespect, and I'm not an attorney, and I certainly don't have any specialization with regard to safety issues, but I've spent several trips there to observe what I noticed. And if you look at the difference in traffic on that property from a decade or 2 decades ago, I don't concur that we don't have a safety issue with regard to where it is proposed that the westerly driveway would be. I think we do have a safety issue.
Do you feel it would be safer to have a 20-foot wide road on the east with having shared access by 2 properties of this nature that doesn't meet the FAR requirements?
Well, why does it have to be a driveway that doesn't meet the FAR requirements? Because a driveway to the east, where the current entrance is for the Conservancy, that location does not have the safety issue concerns that your proposed westerly driveway has.
The sight lines that your village engineer said were adequate and that Nelson Pope and Voorhees reported, re-reported, and testified were adequate.
But our visits to the property bore out, you know, different results.
And they're common sense. And you're speaking to a planning board that's not made up of lawyers or, you know,
This is introduce yourself.
How you doing? Russ Scott from Nelson and Pope. So I just want to go into the Astro requirements. I understand, you know, there's a belief of common sense and then fact. So the Astro is a document that municipalities use all around the country. The DOT, the county, towns, and other municipalities use that document as guidance. The numbers in there are studied over years and years. They are not numbers that Nelson and Pope and Voorhees pulled out of the air. These are documented numbers. They are guidelines to use that's stating that for a right turn, you need 280 feet. If you have 500 feet, they say you only need 280 feet to make that turn. We are in excess of those sight distances. So I don't understand the common sense approach of, well, it's not safe because these guidelines are saying you're beyond the recommended distances that you need to make those turns.
It's not the conflict points, because that seems to be what you're referring to, the turns.
It's
the sight distance when you're pulling out and you have the bicyclist flying down further lane. That's really what it's more about that. It's not pedestrians, they're moving slow enough.
Right, so.
It's really about that's a bike route unofficially. And it's really about having that, you have the neighbor to the west planted almost to the road, okay?
A forest,
So
it's not a hedge.
you,
Right.
and so you have the foliage, so it impairs your vision. That's what we're talking about, really, is that safety. Somewhat maybe with the cars, with the big trucks, but it's really about, in the summer, you have hundreds of bicyclists cruising down Further Lane.
But the bicyclists don't, so those distances are based on the speed of the roadway. So there's a big chart, if you have a 55-mile-an-hour roadway, the distances are different than if you had a 30-mile-an-hour roadway. So we use the chart for the speed of the road. The bicycles are not going to be traveling faster than the cars. So if you're,
Time on Further Lane in the summer,
so I have not.
I would disagree.
there are bike
with that.
clubs that go a lot faster.
A lot faster. Then Nelson and Pope can look at those distances. We have, so there's a lot of cushion, right? We were at 280, the numbers were at 280. It wasn't, we were just making it. So you could look and say, well, you know, the regulation showed that the car was at 30 miles an hour, but a car going 40 miles an hour can also be seen because we were beyond the recommended sight distance. So we can definitely look at faster bicycles and faster moving vehicles and say that these vehicles and bicycles also meet these guidelines, and your sight triangles are able to see these other people. I just, you know, I get the common sense part, but, you know, we do a lot of work, design work on state roads and county roads and new accesses for subdivisions, and everybody requires the same thing, and everyone uses the same manual. So it's not numbers that were just picked out of the air. They're, you know, they're guidelines.
No, understood.
So-
Your firm is a very well-respected firm, and I know the village retains your firm occasionally also. So it's just that when we got there and we saw what was going on, it didn't line up. So I don't think anybody's questioning that you manipulated the numbers or pulled them
No,
out of
I'm not,
thin
and I'm not
air.
inferring that.
I just think that it's,
You know, there's fact and it's, you know, we're brought in a lot of times for speeding issues. People say people are speeding down the road, people are speeding down the road. You put tubes out in the road, you calculate the speeds, everyone says the cars are going 50, all of a sudden you come back and say the cars are only going 35. You know, there's a perception thing and there's a, you know, a reality or a fact thing. So I'm just saying the numbers, you know, they're generous and they're calculated. Just because if you're standing there, if you feel that you can't see, there's numbers that support that you have plenty of time for the car to stop and you have the correct distances. That's all I'm saying.
This
Thank
is
you.
site-specific in a
So-
village. We do respect your firm,
So-
and we've said that from the beginning. But site-specific to this village circumstance, we're concerned about safety.
There's an enormous amount of tailgating. I mean, I find when I drive around the village, there are people right on my tail at 30 miles an hour or whatever, and it's unsafe, it's too bad that everybody's in such a hurry. I turn right on from Panago onto Amy's Lane, where I live, and people are literally within 3 feet of me, for what it's worth.
so getting back to options, I don't know if we have a good solution to this problem. You know?
If you give us an adjournment, we'll see what our thinking caps on and see what we can come up.
Fair enough. So, is that a vote to give it an adjournment, or is that just me?
No,
Just not closing the hearing.
yeah, you
Okay,
just,
so we're
yeah.
gonna leave the hearing open.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm just curious why you would not want to do the single driveway where the easterly entrance is at the conserv. Why, I'm just curious. That's my question.
One of Mr. Barron's goals
Mhm.
was not to have One of Mr. Barron's goals, his further farm, right, was not to have the undeveloped lot, which is in further farm's name, which he has no present intentions of developing. He didn't want to have that separated from the remainder of his property because he would like to be able to use it as a contiguous property since he has no plans to develop it. At the same time, we can't sterilize that lot because we can't see into the future forever. There might come a time when they might have to sell it, or it would be appropriate to get rid of it. And so we can't say it's never going to have any roadway access. We have to come up with a plan that foresees that at some time in the future, those lots might not all be beneficially owned by the same family. So this application had the advantage to Mr. Fixel of giving him a better entrance, a safer entrance to his property, where he wouldn't be sharing a 20-foot wide easement that runs about 1,500 feet back to his property. It would give him that advantage, and would give Mr. Barron the advantage of being able to join his undeveloped lot with the rest of his property, functionally speaking, running the driveway. So one of the entire purposes here was to move the driveway access from its easterly location to its westerly location. And as I've reported to the board, when I look back at the documents that are available, we can find no reason for why the curb cut was located where it was, except for the fact that the surveyor at that time drew it in that location.
Right.
There doesn't appear to be any other reason that we can see articulated in the planning board resolution or the other things that are available to us.
So if you're looking for options, I'm just asking, that's our safety concern is greatly minimized by, in my case, by visualizing that singular curb cut is at the easterly.
Well, if
place.
that's
So
the,
I'm just asking
if that's the
why
case,
that
we wouldn't.
wasn't-
If that's the case, we wouldn't need to come to you for any approval. If we retained that as the sole access point for both lots, it would be within the existing subdivision approval, and we wouldn't need your approval. And I think that's probably something that we'll look at in terms of if this board is not only looking for a single curb cut, but not to see the curb cut relocated, then I'm not sure what we'll do. As I said, we have to put our thinking caps on based on the comments that were made today and see what kind of a solution we can come up with.
And one quick question, just to refresh my memory. Fixel's going to give up their right to use that 20-foot flag strip, as I recall.
Correct.
Okay.
So that essentially, unless and until the further farm lot was passed out of the common ownership of Mr. Barron's family, there would be no utilization of that easterly curb cut that we propose to retain at all, because the agreement between, because there's an underlying agreement that facilitated this application. I was one of the attorneys who worked on preparing it. The agreement basically that exists is that Mr. Barron's family wouldn't need an access point for that lot as long as his family owned both the lot to the east, the house lot, and this vacant lot, which is to the west, the further farm lot. But if there came a time when they passed out of common ownership and they were no longer owned by the family or members of the family, then his right to use the access created by the relocated driveway would essentially spring into being. That was the idea. That was our first idea when we came here. And then when you said, when as a result of the pre-submission meeting, the suggestion was that we consider retaining both curb cuts to avoid the width of the new driveway, then we came up with an alternative agreement that essentially still means that that easterly curb cut would never be activated unless and until the further farm lot passed out of the common ownership by the Barron family. I mean, we could covenant to that, but we don't know when, if ever, that might happen. And it would be an uncertain event, and I don't know that it would, if that makes a difference to the board, that covenant would merely, what could I say? It would merely reflect Mr. Barron's intentions, but that's what we have.
Okay, thank you.
I have one question. Go ahead. It's probably for Ken. If either one of those two lots in the future developed, that current driveway, that current curb, would that have to meet or be brought up to FAR standard?
No.
It's grandfathered in?
I don't mean to answer for Mr. Cohen, but as he said before, if you don't modify the subdivision, then the way the state rule works, if we are under an existing subdivision approval that predated the FAAR rules, then driveway access does not have to meet the FAAR rules.
So it could stay the same.
But nobody wins.
If you want
Well,
to figure of speech.
I have a question for Ken, because we debate this stuff all the time. With the firefighter's hat on, which solution do you prefer? Okay. No, but I think we're trying to, we have been discussing balancing safety issues. And I think that we have different kinds of safety, and we want to address everybody's issues. So, as we want the aesthetic, the traffic safety issue, and the fire safety issue. And I think we have a blend of those things in the works here. I just don't want to see us in a position where we're going to abandon all of it.
All right, so I think for now, we're going to hold the hearing open and adjourn the meeting.
March 12th is your next meeting date.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Aye.
All in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you for your